But first off, let's go back to that Bulger story that's on the front page of the Mirror today. That's the splash, the front page, and pages 4-5, the spread inside, where Denise Fergus, as she's known now, reveals that she's been having private conversations with the Justice Secretary Dominic Raab. Those 4 words always sound so strange, who has told her of plans for a new law that would keep her son's killer behind bars. Now, for those who don't know, James was just 2 years old when he was kidnapped from a Bootle shopping centre, tortured and killed by 2 10-year-old boys in 1993. Now, the 30th anniversary of that event is just a few weeks away, and it seems the government is quite keen to mark it by looking as tough as possible. Jason, what are Raab's plans exactly? How's it going to work?
So this actually applies to one of the killers, Jon Venables. He is broken the terms of his parole twice, and Raab has told Denise Fergus that they're looking to introduce a new kind of law that for serious offenders who repeatedly break their parole, it would be 2 strikes and out roll, will no longer have the right to appeal for parole and therefore will be in jail for the rest of their lives. Now, there's some uncertainty here. This was a private conversation between Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary, and Denise. It's followed previous conversations when he was Justice Secretary before, then he got moved by Liz Truss, and then Liz Truss was signalled that she was going to kind of undo this proposal. He's now back as Justice Secretary. So she has now got this fresh hope that this should happen. Obviously, it's a very contentious area, Susie. I mean, do we believe in rehabilitation or we don't? Does rehabilitation only apply to certain criminals or not to others? Is it possible to rehabilitate people? Are some always going to be recidivists? These are difficult questions, and I'm not sure personally I have the answers to any of them. But I can see for somebody who's been through trauma Denise has been through, why... which is almost impossible to comprehend, but you know, she would be absolutely distraught to think that her son's killer would be allowed out of jail.
Of course she would. And there's some further stuff in that article there, which talks about how Denise has been speaking to a professor who was working on the original case. Now, at the time in 1993, there was huge uproar because people wanted life sentences for those who were responsible for the murder of Jamie. When they found out that it was 2 10-year-old boys, that public anger didn't sort of evaporate. It kind of almost got worse because it was just considered so implausible that they could have done the things they did. And so there was a huge round about whether or not they should have been tried as adults or whether they should be tried as juveniles. And in the end, they made a fudge, I think, Jason. They tried them, but in such a way that the barristers took their wigs off and it was a little bit more friendly than usual. And the sentencing was in a young offenders institution, I believe. I can't quite remember the actual, now I've started down this route, the actual outcome of that argument, whether or not they got tried as, I think they did get tried as grown-ups, didn't they? But
I can't remember, Susie.
The wigs off, I think.
I mean, it's worth pointing out, though, that the judge to take the unusual step of naming a child criminal. I mean, if you're under 16, you have anonymity normally, but in this case, he decided to name them. And it is more complicated.
It's an adult court, apparently, although it was criticised by the European Court of Human Rights.
Yeah, and it is, as I say, this is slightly complicated in fact that the other killer, Thompson, has, we believe, been successfully rehabilitated. So it's just, you know, it shows that, you know, depending on the character, depending on the circumstances, depending on the background, depending on the efforts by the parole, the prison services, that you can, you know, there is a way of rehabilitation, but it obviously hasn't worked in Venables' case, and that's what makes this so complicated and so difficult.
Yeah, and there's so many emotions in it as well, of course. So now get into the comments. Tell us what you think, firstly, about a teacher's strike, if that announcement comes out today, as is expected at 5 o'clock. And what about Jon Venables, should he have a chance at rehabilitation? Can he be rehabilitated? Or is he going to have to just, be locked up for life and we're going to have to pay for it? And there's no way of saving him, as it were. But the question is, I suppose, Jason, how this could possibly work, a law like this, because they're talking about extending this to serious criminals, which they call sort of murderers, child rapists, terrorists, that sort of thing. But they have very recently, of course, Dominic Raab and I think some others have talked about making Just Stop Oil activists, labelling that as a form of terrorism. So if he is going to call environmental activists a terrorist and he's going to bring this law in for terrorists, does that mean that someone who, an elderly priest, as we've seen, who chains themselves to a motorway gantry and causes some queues, is going to be denied the chance of parole because Jon Venables needs to be?
Well, this is you're absolutely right, Susie. This is where it gets so complicated, because I mean, how do you define what is a really serious crime? In terms of, like, we know what murder is, but terrorism is slightly different. And then you've got this, as you say, this problem of if you breach your parole, then do you breach it? It's a minor breach or is it a major breach? In Venables' case, it was pretty horrific. It was kind of, they found child abuse images on his PC. But if it's just a minor breach, let's say you're kind of an hour late for your meeting with your parole officer, does that then apply that there's 2 strikes and out law? Does that then apply to that? So as you say, it's fraught with difficulties. There'll be lots of individual circumstances where you'll think, well, hang on, that's a bit of an injustice. And others, when you go, yeah, lock them up, and I kind of and this is why kind of blanket laws like this very rarely work. I mean, it's the same with this kind of the police action or the new powers to give police to kind of say just stop oil. I mean, it always strikes me that the Tories are very fond of curtailing the kind of civil liberties of protest groups they disagree with. But these laws could come back to haunt them, because the next demonstration could actually be another countryside allowance. Exactly.
Can you imagine if these laws were used to stop a Brexit demonstration? Yeah. For example, I think there was some talk today of some fresh laws about protests and giving police more powers. So, I mean, if you want to just stop oil because they're the ones protesting against you or your policies, what happens when it's someone protesting for the things that you like? It gets a bit sticky, doesn't it? Now, it's very difficult, I suppose, to ask questions about this in some way. Copite Mark says, if he is released again, will he have a new identity? Almost certainly, Copite, because that's how he was. He and Robert Thompson were both released from young offenders after the first 8 years. I think they were released at the age of 18. And people do forget there was a second killer, Robert Thompson, and he appears to have been rehabilitated. As Jason says, he's living a normal life. He has a partner, last time anyone knew about it. And it is possible, therefore, it would seem, to save somebody from the dysfunctional background that led to a brutal event, and that could then, even knowing that you had done that as a child, could affect the rest of your life. John Stelzner says, this sounds like a backdoor attack on all of our human rights. It's the thing, isn't it? It's the unintended consequences, Jason, of a law that you bring in because it sounds right, because it makes a headline, because you want to tackle one particular problem, and you don't realise that it's going to filter out and just affect everybody. You can't make a law just for Jon Venables, can you?
No.
That's the basic problem. I don't know how they're going to get around some of that. But isn't this a case of giving up on rehabilitation in a way? It's saying, that's it. They're past the point of return. If you commit this kind of offence, that's it. There's no hope for you.
Yeah, I whether it was possible to, or is possible to rehabilitate Jon Venables, I just don't know. Should we be doing more to help rehabilitation? Yes, we certainly should. Our prisons are a complete mess at the moment. There's staff shortages. They're spending far too much time locked up in cells. There's not nearly enough done to actually kind of, help them get the skills to survive. And the main problem is that an awful lot of prisoners have serious mental health problems as well. and not to mention kind of drug addiction. And that, that's they are the easy area to forget in politics, but actually they are quite an important area, because actually most of society suffers because we don't do enough to help people in prison.
And of course, it's very easy as well to get voters to agree there should be more prison for things, because most voters have never been in a prison or anywhere near it, or know anybody who's been in it, and therefore they don't quite know what it's like. Now, Kezia Woods says rehabilitation works for some, which is why people are assessed before being released. But with a lack of funds for public services, corners are cut, leading to big mistakes and people being released who shouldn't be. I think, Kezia, you have hit the nail on the head and the fundamental problem with Jon Venables. Kezia, get into the comments, message me, and we will give you the News Agenda mug, because you have made the pithy comment. That's the fundamental thing, isn't it? It's the assessment of Thompson that he was okay to be released and live his life, and he will still be seeing parole officers. That's plainly working. The assessment of Venables several times and the monitoring of him when he was released have both been abysmal. And I can't help, it may well be that he would have more problems than Thompson, but if he'd had proper help, maybe it would have been fixed. I mean, I don't know if anyone out there is watching this. Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been in jail for an offence? Did you go through any kind of rehabilitation? Because I have. I got nicked for smashing up my then husband's fancy piece's front window, right? And I got carted off in cuffs to the cells, and I got what's called a police caution, where you admit guilt for something. I admitted guilt for criminal damage. It was really attempted murder, but it was criminal damage that I confessed to. And I got a caution, which means you have to be well behaved for like a year afterwards. And that's a kind of rehabilitation, because they give a caution to someone when they go, well, you know what? We know you're not a terrible criminal. You are a very upset woman right now, and you're going to calm down. But we're just going to warn you that if you come back in the next 12 months because you keep getting angry, then next time it could be worse. So that's, I do behave now because they've got my DNA and I have to. But that's a form of rehabilitation. And, if someone's addicted to drugs, we don't say, well, there's no point trying to save you. You're an addict. Clear off. We keep offering them help, and we save most or some of them. And there are some that we can't, but we don't stop offering the help and say that we are beyond redemption because you're a drug addict. And isn't it the same if you've committed a terrible offence? You keep offering help. Isn't that what makes us human, rather than, I don't know, horrible animals?
When's your biography coming out, Susie? I want to read it.
It came out in 2013. It's available in all good Amazons. And I do still get the very occasional teeny tiny royalty check. But and it starts with that event. So but thank you for the chance of advertising, Jason. Why should we give up? We don't give up on addicts. We don't give up on people who've just had a really bad day, like I did. Why do we give up on people who commit the worst offences? Aren't they the ones who need saving the most? The terrorists, the criminals, the paedophiles. Why don't we put more effort into them? Is there an answer to that? I suspect not, but I suspect they're the ones we should put the effort into, but they're the ones that politically we can't throw all our resources at, although they're the ones causing lots of the problems.